Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Do we have anybody on WebEx?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Bill request, are there any bills that would like to be introduced? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I believe this is the first request for bill introduction for you, Mr. Chair.
I feel honored.
I feel honored as well. So it's RS 2746, and it relates to updates to the net metering law.
Okay, is there any questions from the committee? Any comments? If not, we will introduce it. Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chair.
Is there any other bills? Okay, today we have a presentation on competitiveness of Kansas electric rates by Justin Grady, Chief of Revenue Requirements for the KCC. It's an honor to have you here, Justin. Thank you. Welcome to committee.
I think this goes high enough. There we go. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Senator Fagg, Vice Chair Peterson, and I was going to say Ranking Minority Francisco. So Ranking Minority Francisco and members of the committee. As the chair said, my name is Justin Grady. I'm the Chief of Revenue Requirements, Cost of Service, and Finance. I work in the Utilities Division at the KCC. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way right now. I did not update the date on this presentation in the footnotes. That's the date from when I did this presentation last Thursday to the House, so I'm sorry. But I did update the cover, and I got the Senate Utilities Committee accurately updated. I'm on slide 2, and this is just sort of an overview, roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. If you've ever seen this presentation before, it'll look pretty similar to you. But we did add one, there is a change in that we added the preliminary data that the EIA provides through October of 2023, and we've never done that before. And I think it'll become evident as we go through the presentation as to why we did that. And we thought that was an important part of the story. So still on slide 2, what we're going to provide is we'll focus on the full year 2022 data as provided by EIA, which is the last full year final data that we have, and then the most recent preliminary monthly data that we have from the EIA through October of 2023. And then we'll also do we'll talk about a regional rate comparison, which is actually the most sort of apples to apples comparison. You can take your individual utility in the state or the utility that predominantly serves your district and compare them to the other 37 utilities in the states surrounding Kansas and look and see exactly what their rates are. So we're on slide 3 now. And there's a lot of words on that slide. I'm not going to read it. If the slide looks like it does, because this is copied and pasted directly from the stakeholder agreement that we arrived at around 3 or 4 years ago now, where we had discussions with the industrial customers and residential consumer advocates and the investor-owned utilities and municipal and cooperative interests, and there was an interest in the KCC reporting the state of regional competitiveness of utility rates in the state every year to both the House and the Senate, and so this is the agreement that we reached, and we've stayed true to the agreement. So like I said, if you've seen this presentation before, the data is going to look pretty similar. Or at least the source of the data. We always pull it from EIA. The good thing about the Energy Information Administration is it's publicly available data. So, you don't have to have a subscription or any sort of proprietary access. Anybody can go out and pull these numbers and keep us honest, and we encourage it. It's all publicly available. The other good thing about EIA data is, it's it's just published by a nonpartisan research wing of the federal government. Their job is to just report energy data for all across the country. So, there's a level of consistency and transparency there. But the downside to EIA data is, like we talked about, the full year 2022 information is provided to us in October of 2023. And then there's about a 60-day lag on any of the preliminary monthly data that we have access to. There might be November of 23 data out. I have not looked, but if there is, it was released like today or tomorrow or yesterday. But October of 23 is the most recent preliminary data that we have. So keep that in mind. But on slide 4, we'll jump into the data itself and the comparison. So just a quick note of, what we're looking at, right? At least so far. This is, if you go to EIA, this is the all consumer, what is it called? All users, all consumers, all sectors. It's the all sector electric or energy rate for the state of Kansas for the year 2022. And so the way that the EIA calculates that is it's literally, total electric revenue reported by all utility types. It's investor-owned utility, municipal and cooperative, all averaged together, divided by all kilowatt hours sold to all consumer types. So, residential, consumer, residential, commercial, and industrial. And so, this is the rate that you see published most often, and talked about most often, but it's literally a rate that nobody in the state pays for electricity. But, the good thing about it is it's calculated the same way for all the other states. It's EIA data. It does give you a good sort of all-in benchmark average to look at over the years and say, where do we stand? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? How have electricity rates on average for everybody changed in our state as well as in other states? And you can see the results is that, 2022 was not a great year for advancing regional rate competitiveness in the state. Electricity rates in the state in the year 2022 went up by 9.55%. And that's greater than the regional peer average that was 6.77%. It's less than the United States average. It's less than what happened in Texas and Oklahoma, but it was greater than a lot of the states. I think what you'll see as we go through the data is that, 2022 was heavily influenced by just underlying core, commodity and fuel price inflation that was occurring in our economy in 2022. So, we experienced natural gas prices of $8, $9 for a majority of the year 2022. And we haven't seen prices like that in this country since, 2008, and then before that, since the early 2000s. And so, and that reversal, that jump was extremely rapid, right? And the reasons for it are probably multitude, but it corresponded with right after Winter Storm Uri, as people were trying to refill their storage tanks throughout the United States, and then also, in the months leading up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, suddenly the world was trying to replace all that lost Russian gas for Western Europe. And so it wasn't just a Kansas thing. This is a nationwide thing. Lots of fuel price and commodity price inflation in 2022. The other thing I think you'll see is that, at least with regard to Evergy, which, again, this is all in here, but Evergy had some significant under recovery of 2021 fuel prices that sort of lumped into 22. And so you'll see that as we start talking about the data through October of 23, a lot of this sort of anomalous increase has reversed itself. But before we jump off this slide, you can look, some of that lumpiness is smoothed out when you look at it over a 5-year period of time. So if you look at that far right column, you can see, where Kansas stands relative to the region and relative to the United States average over that 5-year period of time through year-end 2022. It's a little bit of a better picture, for sure. Okay, slide 5. So this is that preliminary data that we've added this year. The preliminary data through October shows that Kansas's all-in electric rate has declined by 5.93% in the first 10 months of the year of 2023. That compares to the regional peer average of a reduction of 2.39%. And, you can see that how the other numbers compare there. The United States average electricity rates continue to increase in 23. And then what I think is sort of my takeaway from this slide is because the year-to-year data is so volatile, it can be. But if you just look at the highlighted line in the very far right column, you look at October of 2023's electricity rates and compare it to where we stood in 2017, and with all riders and surcharges and everything else that's occurred, in total, Kansas's electricity rates are up 0.65% in that almost 6-year period of time. And that compares to the regional peer average of 10%, Arkansas at 26. You can look at the numbers, and see where we stand relative to the other states. On slide 6 now, we're going to talk about industrial customer rates. Again, this isn't, investor-owned utilities, so this would be sort of the average of all industrial rates in the state. Again, same story, 2022, industrial rates increased by 12.47%. That's more than the regional peer average, a little less than the United States total, less than Texas and Oklahoma, but still, substantial. And when you look at that number, you think, wow, how could you, why, right? Why is that number higher than residential customers or than the total average? And it's because, and I think you could ask an industrial customer representative, and I think they'd agree with this. The industrial customer rates are, on average, 40% less than residential rates for good reason, right? It's because those customers are the best type of customers to have. They have high load factors. They own some of the portions of the distribution grid that are used to serve them. So they have lower rates. But we all pay the same fuel prices. And so what happened in 2022 was a spike in fuel prices from natural gas and coal and wholesale electricity prices that ran up. And so if we all are exposed to those fuel price increases and your rate is already 40% less, then relative to that, your existing rate, your increase is going to be more. And I think that's intuitive, and that's what happened. But as you see on slide 7, you see that start to back off. They went up more than the average, and now they're coming down faster than the average. And so this is what's happened through the first 10 months of 23. Ultimately, the Kansas competitiveness compared to industrial rates really hasn't changed much from 21 through October of 23. It's about the same story. Okay, slide 8 is residential rates. Again, this is going to be an average of everybody, all utility types. Excuse me. So Kansas's average residential rate increased by 7.77% in the year 2022. A little more than the regional peer average, less than the United States total. It's sort of the same story again when you go to slide 9. Similar to some of the other customer classes, Kansas's rates for residential customers have declined in the first 10 months of the year 2023. And somewhat interestingly to me, that's the only state in the region that has reported those numbers. Or a decline like that. And, I don't know if it's because some of those utility types were, tried to recover some of their Winter Storm Uri costs in 2022 or exactly what's going on. But, our largest investor-owned utilities started recovering Winter Storm Uri costs in April of 2023. So this includes Winter Storm Uri recovery, and yet still costs are down. So actually, when Evergy started recovering Winter Storm Uri costs in April of 23, the fuel charge actually went down relative to what it was in the previous year of 2022, which kind of shows you just how anomalous that year was. But in any case, where we stand today is, fourth highest out of these 10 states in terms of residential rates themselves. And that's about 2.08% higher than the regional peer average that you can see there. Okay, slide 10. So we always like to have a conversation about bills as well, and not just rates, for a couple of reasons, right? First, we all know that, maybe 95 or 99% of your constituents and, my family members and other residential customers, what they really care about at the end of the day is their monthly bills. So in 2022, their bill increased on average across the state 12.35%. Now that is a sort of a combination of a 7.77% rate increase plus the average usage increased by 4.26%. So even in the face of those higher rates, customers were using more. And what you see there is that, if you rank, how do we rank in terms of monthly bills, at least in the year 2022, then we would be fourth out of 10, below Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas, and, a little bit above South Dakota, et cetera. You can see the numbers. That is also 2.36% higher than the regional peer average of $126. So on average, across these 10 states, a regular residential customer is paying $126.80, and a Kansas customer pays $129.80. Now, the reason that we go through this like this and focus on this slide is because, if you look at just the middle column, and if the conversation that we had was always only about the price, which remember is just calculated as total revenue divided by total usage, then you would, rightfully so, you look at that and you say, well, why are we, 9% higher than the regional peer average? Our customers pay $13 or 13.99 cents, and they pay 12.73 cents on average. And, the first answer I'm probably going to give you that's probably the most instructive and quantitative and objective is, well, it's in part because they use 8.4% more electricity on average. And so, when you look at the combination of those two things, our bills, the overall rate is 9% higher, but the bills are 2% higher. And it's because of that. It's because of that usage by and large. And it's, the EIA rate data is calculated and reported like that, but that's also just a reality of the rate-making process. Public utility rate-making at its core is a cost of service business. It's all the costs of providing service. It's an opportunity to earn a profit margin and then divided by all of your usage. And like any equation like that, if the denominator is 10% lower, then on average, the result of that calculation, the rate's going to be 10% higher. So that's, you can look at South Dakota, you can look at any individual number in that chart and make a similar comparison. But just quickly, look at South Dakota. So they're right under us. So their rates are 13.5% lower and their usage is 14% higher. And lo and behold, the bill is almost the same. It's 1.4% different. So I say this a lot and I point these charts out a lot, and I do because I just don't think it's if we're going to have an honest conversation about rates, It's just not the complete picture to only look at this middle column. That's just not the whole picture. You know, you got to look at monthly bills as well, and you got to look at how average usage factors into what we're talking about. Let's go to slide 11. You know, last year when I presented this slide, which was the first year we had done it, this chart, these lines literally look like an X, you know, and it was almost a perfect inversely correlated, and it's still pretty much true. I mean, there's a way to explain what's going on here with Oklahoma and Texas on the far right, but as you see, it's just usually the case that if you use less electricity on average per customer, you have higher rates per customer on average. And if you use more electricity on average per customer, you have lower rates on average per customer. But what happened with Oklahoma and Texas last year was interesting. You know, they had such a severe fuel price shock that their higher usage and their weather patterns, their weather consumption, the fact that they use more electricity, it just didn't help them. It didn't drive down their overall rate. And as a result, you know, if you look at slide 10, Texas's average monthly bill in the year 2022 was 25% higher than Kansas. All right, it was the highest in the region, and Oklahoma was just a little below that. And so I think what you'll see, because 2022 was sort of anomalous and things have come back down, you know, natural gas prices have gotten more reasonable, production is up, and wholesale electricity prices are back down. I think you'll see Oklahoma and Texas in the years to come. I mean, you know, we'll see, but I think you'll see that stark inverse correlation relationship represented again, and you know, you'll see that there really is a major, you know, linkage between average usage and total rates. Okay, we're going to speed up a little. Slide 12 is this is Evergy's data now. So everything we talked about before was EIA, all in, average, everything else. But now we're talking about Evergy data. EIA also reports this information for individual utilities. You can go find it for all 115 individual utilities in the country. This is their average residential monthly bill for either Evergy Kansas Metro or Evergy Kansas Central. And, you know, when we've reported this data in the past, they had a really good story to tell. You know, they have exhibited, their monthly bills have exhibited a really phenomenal level of stability over a long period of time, especially compared to inflation. But that caught up in 2022. And if you look at Evergy Kansas Central through year-end 2022, now their total residential rate increase or residential bill increase over that period of time is a little bit higher than inflation. Now, you know, the EIA reports their preliminary monthly bill data as well. I didn't pull it for every single utility. It's more manual. It's more difficult to get. It's more work to get it, but you can find their preliminary October 2023 bill data, and you'll see that for the first 10 months of 2023, their bills are down 9.5%. So that's just recognizing that lumpiness and the unusual nature of 22, like we've talked about. Evergy Metro's bills are down 4.48% in 2023 first 10 months. And so, you know, if you were to do those calculations with that updated data, it'll show more like 10 or 12% lower than inflation over that period of time. But through that 10-year period of time, that's what it looked like. And then slide 13 is the same data from the previous slide, but it's just graphed, and you can see, you know, where the numbers are there for the two major Evergy utilities. Slide 14. Slide 14 is where we get into the actual. So in your presentation, in the sheets that look like this is just, you know, the actual EIA data for each 38 utilities. And I've highlighted the Kansas utilities in there, at least I think the averaging ones, and compared, done calculations to see how they compare to their peers. And so you can see Evergy Kansas Central had the 10th highest rates and the 14th highest bills out of 38 utilities. They were 8.23% higher than the average utility outside of Kansas. Bills were 7.55% higher. And for Metro 2022, you know, that fuel price inflation and that underlying commodity inflation in 2022 didn't affect Evergy Kansas Metro as much, in part because they have, you know, higher relative proportion of coal and less natural gas, and a little higher relative proportion of nuclear. So their bills were actually lower than Evergy Kansas Central's in 2022. They had the 19th highest rates. Their rates were a little bit lower than the average utility around in the states surrounding us, but their bills were higher. They do have quite a bit higher average usage than Evergy Kansas Central. You can see for commercial and industrial, you know, industrial rates get a lot of discussion for obvious reasons. Those are really important customers. In 2022, which was sort of the high water mark, you know, like we talked about, Evergy Kansas Central, who serves, you know, by far and away most industrial load in the state, at least in the eastern third of the state, their rates were 2.64% higher than the average outside of Kansas. And they ranked 19th out of 38 utilities, so sort of right in the middle. And Evergy Kansas Metro, though, this is a recurring story. You know, they have high industrial rates, and they sort of always have. They just don't have a lot of industrial customers. And, you know, it'd be a fair observation to say maybe they don't have a lot of industrial customers because they have high industrial rates. But it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing, because if they had more customers, then they would have more usage and they would have a larger denominator in that calculation, and they would have lower rates for their industrial customers. But they have a much smaller industrial presence than Central. Okay, slide 15 and 16 are the cooperatives and municipals that we agreed to report on pursuant to the stakeholder agreement. You know, the difficulty with this data is that not every state in the country reports, not every cooperative in every state reports to the EIA. So, you know, I could get a list of the cooperatives that this is, and I've seen the list, but it's like 8 or 9 cooperatives out of our state. So I'm not sure how representative it is, be honest with you. It's kind of a deficiency in the data, and but it is what it is. But you can see for residential, their residential customer rates grew by 7.38%. The commercial prices shrank by 1.2%, and their industrial rates were pretty flat in 2022. For municipals, on the next page, slide 16, the Kansas municipal rates in 22 grew by 14%. Commercial rates grew by 17.84%, and the industrial rate grew by 8.35%. And so you see that exposure to wholesale market prices. You see that increase, that bump up relative to the underlying fuel price inflation that occurred in 22. And I'm sure if we looked at this for 2023, municipals in Kansas will come back down, just like what you've seen with the other slides. So that's it. That's the data. Certainly look forward to any questions that the committee has at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Grady. Does the committee have any questions at this point? Senator Schellenberg?
I was waiting on Senator Thompson. He always does. I have a question, not necessarily about the data, but just to understand. In my district, I have Liberty, which operates out of Missouri and Kansas, and Evergy, and Kansas City operates out of Missouri and Kansas. Does the KCC only sets the rates in Kansas? Is that correct?
That's correct.
How does Evergy's rate is Evergy's rate in Missouri less or higher than Evergy's rate in Kansas for the metro area?
Yeah,
And the same with Liberty. If you have any idea, you can guess if you want to.
Yeah, so that should be listed here in my list. So we can see the Empire, Missouri residential rate is a little bit higher than the Empire, Kansas rate. You see there, number 2 and number 3 on the list. And the Evergy Metro Missouri rate is lower. It's 12.97 cents, and the Kansas rate is 12.99 cents. So that's less than 0.05% difference. So they're relatively close. But it's interesting because their average monthly bill is down the list quite a bit. But that list has, you know, every single utility in the 10 states surrounding us, and you can look at those comparisons.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Took me a minute to catch up here. Thanks, Justin. Yesterday we heard from Evergy, and one of their concerns is that they saw as a barrier to future investment in generation and capital and everything else was the regulatory structure in the state. And you know, I look at Texas and they're deregulated, and yet you look at the wild swings you see down there with the rates for various reasons. I just wanted to get your comment on that.
So this might not surprise you that I didn't agree with everything Mr. Casely said yesterday. You know, look, I think if we're going to have an honest conversation about the regulatory environment in Kansas and compare that to Missouri, then we ought to make sure we have a comprehensive discussion about it and not just look at one item or this item that they may want to change in Kansas, right? And I think we will have that conversation, but I'll give you a few examples. So in Missouri, they do not allow their utilities to pass through 100% of fuel costs that change up and down. Like we talked about in 2022, it was a sort of a spiky year. Well, in Missouri, I think it's 95% of those costs that pass through. You know, they do not treat transmission charges the way that we do in this state. They don't have a transmission delivery charge like we do. They are not allowed to recover construction work in progress, and we do that in this state. We do a rate case in 8 months, they do it in 10. You know, so let me think if I can think of anything else. We have a property tax surcharge that actually hits customer bills, your constituents' bills every year, and they have a deferral process that, you know, allows them to defer and accumulate that and then recover it in the next rate case. So, you know, and that's just off the top of my head, right? There are several other major differences between the regulatory environments in Kansas and Missouri. So I'm not afraid of having that conversation. I just want to make sure it's a comprehensive conversation. You know, one other quick thing is I heard a lot of us being compared to Arizona and Texas and Florida, and so those ranking systems are sort of peculiar because, I mean, I saw the Wells Fargo report, and for whatever reason, they're pretty upset at us right now. They don't like the result of the last rate case. That was a unanimous settlement agreement that everybody agreed to. You know, I think Evergy was more happy with that result, or they would not have settled than their shareholders, right? But for whatever reason, that particular publication has Arizona ranked higher than Kansas. And the other publication that Mr. Casely referred to of the RRA, you know, SNL, S&P Financial Global, they have Arizona ranked as the dead last worst regulatory commission in the country. So there's always another side to the story, you know. I mean, we've had discussions with them about what they want to do. We will have, I'm sure, a wholesome conversation about that particular bill. There are probably things in there that, it's a policy call for the legislature, and we're looking forward to having that conversation. There are other elements of that bill that we're, very opposed to, and, look forward to having that conversation.
Good. Just one other follow-up, Mr. Chair, if I could, real fast. And with, my big concern, obviously, is reliability and future base load and things of that nature, particularly with these bigger plants coming in that are going to use an awful lot of energy. Where do you see us going with regard to that?
I agree. Our job as regulators is reliability is absolutely the most important thing. And then affordability. And, sometimes people might differ in terms of, whether it should be affordability that's more important or reliability. You can't have a system that's so reliable, nobody can afford it, right? So it's a balancing act, obviously. But I think unquestionably, we need more dispatchable energy in this state and in SPP and not less. My boss and I and others at the KCC have been on that, preaching that story for a long time, 4 or 5 years. And it only got more intense after Winter Storm Uri. And I think everybody understands, we're not retiring many more coal plants in the short term in this state. SPP, it's certainly gotten their attention. Resource adequacy is a big deal. And so I agree, we need to have the conversation, and I'm glad that they're bringing it forward, because I'm pretty sure we have to look at the math. That's a big complex question, but at the end of the day, it probably does make sense for them to build a 1,100 megawatt combined cycle natural gas fired hydrogen capable unit. At the end of the day, we need something that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, if we don't have adequate battery storage right now, we need something with a switch on it that you can turn on, all right? And we have a lot of that right now in this state, but maybe it's time for another one.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Pittman, this will be the last question, I think.
I'll be quick. I was really bothered by your graph there, and I redid it for you a little bit. This didn't tell me much of a story. I think if you resort it and actually get that crisscross, it depends on how you sort it, and it really bothered me that this order was just all convoluted. So I just asked, next time you present it, if you're gonna tell that story, kind of make it more of what the story is when you present it, because it's really confusing. It looks like a time series too.
Okay.
Bothers the heck out of me. So I'll show that to you afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. And
That's okay.
And I'm certainly open to suggestions. I'm open to suggestions. I'm an open book. If you wouldn't mind sending me that
I'll do that.
specific, what did you sort it by, and how'd you present the?
Sure. The second thing is, and I don't want to open, does the KCC have an opinion about the BPU at this point in time in any way or form from
About the BPU?
regulatory aspects?
We don't. And that's not just a non-answer. It's because they aren't under our jurisdiction, and we have several industries and dozens of companies that are, and that's where our focus is. And I just don't follow it at all. I really don't know anything about it.
Justin, I got one quick question. When you look on page 10 of the Kansas residential monthly bill data, my question to you is that if we're ranked 49th in the country, from what I've heard, on energy efficiency, and we was to move ourselves to the middle of the pack, would that affect that number very much? That's my question.
I think it would. I think that what you would see is the very far right column would go down, right? Our average monthly bills would get better. And that's why this is such an important chart to have a conversation about, because the middle number may very well go up, right? If we dramatically reduce our usage suddenly, and all other things being equal, it's the same revenue base, then the middle number is going to go up, but the far right number should go down, and we all just need to be cognizant of that, and aware of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, next we have a presentation on important consumer issues from David Nickel, Consumer Counsel, which is CURB. David, welcome committee.
I have to bring this down. Not quite as tall as Mr. Grady. Good afternoon, Chair Fagg and members of the Senate Utility Committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. It's always a pleasure to appear before this board, this committee. Before I start, I'd like to give just a little bit of background about CURB to refresh your recollection about our organization. We've been in existence since 1989. We were made an independent agency in 1991. Our mission is to represent zealously residential ratepayers and small commercial ratepayers before the KCC and before the Kansas Legislature. We have 5 board members. They are appointed by the governor for 4-year staggered terms. That board directs the actions of the Consumer Counsel, who in turn directs the activities of the CURB staff. Board members are not paid. CURB is entirely fee-funded. So that's a little bit about our organization. I will state at the outset, this has been a good year for ratepayers in Kansas. After 5 years of no base rate increases due to the merger that we approved back in 2018, the 2 largest utilities in Kansas filed for rate increases. As a result of those filings, there was a reduction in rates for the Evergy, Kansas metro area and a very moderate increase for Evergy, Kansas Central. That's a good result. On top of that, Evergy, Kansas Central and Evergy, Kansas Metro proposed and the KCC approved optional time of use rates, which are part of those filings. Moreover, in a previous filing, the KCC approved a set of demand-side management programs that are poised to save ratepayers money in their service territories of EKC and EKM. I wish to address briefly those 2 last items. First, on behalf of the Kansas ratepayers, residential ratepayers in particular, and commercial, small commercial, allow me to thank this committee and just senators in general for your work with regard to Kansas utilities. I can confidently say that Kansas has a great utility rate regulation structure. The statutes that govern how KCC regulates rates and the involvement of stakeholders such as CURB have worked well for several decades to protect consumers while at the same time being fair to utilities. The Kansas Legislature has stayed the course while making a few needed changes when necessary to accommodate new challenges. For us at CURB, we are grateful for the work that you do. That Kansas has a good regulatory structure can be affirmed by comparison with other states. In these regards, CURB is a member of an organization called the National Association of State Consumer Advocates, Utility Consumer Advocates, NASUCA. In fact, this last year, I was elected to be on the executive committee of that national organization. The organization consists of ratepayer consumer advocates like CURB from all around the country. NASUCA has 2 business meetings per year. One of the benefits of being a member of NASUCA is that at each of these meetings, all of the members get up and talk about the various challenges that are facing their states. It gives us an opportunity to learn about the challenges that are forthcoming and best practices to deal with those. Kansas, in comparison to other states, has a very good regulatory structure. Oftentimes, when the consumers start to talk about their regulatory structure, I'm left thinking, boy, am I glad I work in Kansas. There are some really crazy legislative and regulatory schemes that exist throughout this nation. Truly, Kansas has a very stable, very fair regulatory structure. Of course, all things are capable of improvement. One area that I would like to see improvement on is for utility stakeholders to work together towards mutually desirable goals. I believe that both utilities and ratepayers have many of the same goals, including reliable and safe utility services at reasonable prices. I believe it is much more efficient to work together towards meeting those regulatory goals than to fight among each other as to who has the best path forward. Communication and open minds are essential. If one party comes to the table saying, this is how we're going to do this, that is not open communication. Rather, we should all come to the table asking, how do you think we can accomplish this goal? CURB has been working to create an atmosphere with our utilities over the last few years. We meet with a few of them on multiple occasions during the year, and at each meeting we talk about the goals for improving the utility systems that serve Kansas ratepayers. To CURB, these meetings are beneficial. They foster open communication and creative problem solving. They create a culture of trust and mutual respect. In fact, the approval of the demand-side management programs by the KCC followed a collaborative effort by Evergy and several stakeholders to meet and find a good set of DSM programs. Evergy invited stakeholders, including CURB, KCC staff, Sierra Club, Climate and Energy Project, and several others, to weigh in what types of programs should be offered and how they should be offered. I'm happy to announce that the KCC approved those programs just recently. Prior to the approval, as the chair noted, Kansas was ranked 49 out of 50 states with regard to energy efficiency programs. Clearly, no state wants to rank lowest on matters that are largely seen as beneficial for ratepayers. Hopefully that ranking will improve over time. Why are DSM programs considered to be beneficial to ratepayers? Well, let's start with what DSM programs are. DSM programs are encompassed by two types of energy savings and power savings programs. Energy efficiency allows a consumer to enjoy the same level of comfort or service at a lower energy consumption. For example, an air conditioner. A higher efficiency air conditioner will allow a consumer to have the same level of comfort at less cost. That benefits the ratepayer. But as you grow that and it becomes system-wide, you save energy and power for the utility. That should bring energy cost down for all residential consumers, for all ratepayers. DR programs are intended to shift, demand response programs are intended to shift when a consumer uses electricity from use of electricity at peak times to use of electricity at non-peak times. Peak time electricity is obviously more expensive than non-peak time, and so as a result of DR programs, again, you should allow the utility to lower its cost for all ratepayers. In December 2021, Evergy filed its sets of DSM programs for both its EKM and EKC territories. These programs consist of 4 residential DSM programs, 4 commercial DSM programs, and a pilot incubator program covering both classes of customers. Those are described in my testimony. I won't go through those. But as a result of that filing and the collaborative work between the parties, the commission did grant the DSM programs that were proposed and negotiated by the various parties. These are projected to save Kansas annual savings of 243,822 megawatt hours of electricity per year and power savings of 246 megawatts. In short, this should be proved beneficial to both ratepayers and to the utility in general. Another great development is the development of time of use rates, which are cost shifting for people to try to move people from peak use to non-peak use. This is a beneficial program that will again, hopefully reduce rates in Kansas over time for all consumers. However, to make these effective, we need good education. I think every party that is involved in this understands the importance of good education in this area. CURB intends to work very hard with our utilities and other stakeholders to try to develop education so that these programs become meaningful. With that, I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think over on the Missouri side, when they tried the time of use as a mandatory thing, it turned into a nightmare. Why was that? Was it just people didn't understand it, or they were just curious?
According to some studies, and I won't say that I'm an expert on this at all, but when you force a program on consumers that are not favorable, that they can't get a positive result, it has a tendency to turn around and blow up the program. And so I think Evergy was very wise to come in with an optional program to allow people to become educated and to find some way that this does work for them, if at all, and to shift that cost accordingly. If you were, and they proposed the same thing in Missouri, but the Missouri Public Service Commission said, no, we're just going to go full bore on it. I think it's very dangerous. I would much rather go optional and get people educated so it does benefit the vast majority of consumers, and we have the vast majority of consumers start to move to time of use rates, use their electricity off-peak times, and lower costs for everybody. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to sort of synthesize what we heard yesterday from Evergy and the earlier presentation from Justin and your presentation. And I mean, it strikes me that, you know, we hear in some quarters that we have a rates crisis in Kansas. It strikes me that we don't have a rates crisis in Kansas. It strikes me that there are definitely areas where we could do better, but that there's no rates crisis happening. Is that consistent with your view, or am I misguided in that?
No, I think it's absolutely consistent with our view. We believe that, you know, like I said, I go to these NASUCA meetings, and I will hear some of the things that are going on in other states, and I start going, wow, boy, I'm glad I'm not in that state. We actually do have a very good system. Heck, it's worked for how many decades? Without question, without any type of substantial change. Nothing really has changed. Of course, you know, the way you look at things may differ. But the truth of the matter is, if you've got a major problem with any particular rate case, there is a court of appeals. If you think that you've been unlawfully treated, unreasonably treated, you have the right to appeal that decision up. That wasn't done in this case. That should tell you something. I think there's a misunderstanding among public in general about utility rates. Utility rates are regulated. They always have been regulated. And as a result of that, utilities are subject to an authorized rate of return. They're not like some of the major Amazons and other things that can turn around and raise whatever capital, whatever rates of return they're going to have unregulated. So this benefits the consumer. At the same time, the KCC has done, I think, a marvelous job of balancing the interest between ratepayers and making sure that our utilities remain healthy. And I have every confidence that they're going to continue that. So to answer your question in short form, no, I don't think we have a rates crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your answer.
Committee, we got any other questions? Well, the time is on us. Great presentation. Thank you for being here today. And is there anything committee wants to bring up? We won't have a meeting tomorrow. We don't have one Monday. Well, next one's Tuesday. So if we don't have any questions, meeting adjourned. Thank you.